secret coronavirus experiment at the Wuhan Institute of Virology has been scrubbed from the internet. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The coronavirus pandemic has been a disaster. I don't even think we fully grasp how much damage it's caused yet. But we've only just begun to uncover the crazy story of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the biolab some think leaked the virus that sparked the pandemic. And now, new information has come out about a secret experiment that began at the lab at the start of 2019. Just a few months before the first reported cases of COVID in China. Joining us today is Jack Posobiec, Senior Editor of Human Events. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, really excited to finally be on, man.
Yeah. So Human Events recently covered the story that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was doing experiments with transgenic mice. That is, mice that, for instance, have been genetically altered to have human DNA. Scientists have been doing that since the 80s, but you discovered something new that is a little bit disturbing. What is it?
Right, and so this is something where the Wuhan Institute themselves, who have come under so much scrutiny, and the United States side, which has been partnered with the Wuhan Institute, has also been completely non-forthcoming about, where we know there have been instances in the past of research and experiments that were going on where the study of were being conducted of gain-of-function experiments. What we're now seeing that we've uncovered is that there was a project that had received approval and funding all the way back in 2018. We found this on an archived document from the Chinese academic, the Medical Journal of Science, right? Where they stated that in January of 2019, a new study was going to begin. And I want to be very clear about that timeline. It was supposed to run January of 19 through December of 2021. That is the timeline that we're given on this approval document for the pathogenicity. So that is essentially how pathogenic, right? How transferable, how transmissible, how infectious are these new bat coronaviruses in transgenic mice. These are mice that have been humanized with human ACE2 receptors in their lungs. So essentially they have the same type of ACE2 receptors in their lungs of these mice that humans have as well. And whether or not spike proteins from these bat coronaviruses can infect these mice. This is the same type of stuff that people were talking about in the past that could lead to the risk of an outbreak of a pandemic, because we knew and they knew that the pathogenicity of this was very high, the transmissibility of this was very high, and that you were directly essentially creating, right, enhancing these viruses through gain-of-function experiments so that they would be infectious to humans, because in the past it wasn't working because they couldn't find ones that would infect the mice. They couldn't find ones where the spike proteins fit. That's why they humanized the mice in the first place. And so the fact that this study was scheduled to begin January 2019, and again, the information on it is very sketchy because it has been completely scrubbed from the Wuhan Institute's website. The database is completely down. There's no information in terms of where these people are now, whether that researcher is still involved. The one thing that we've been able to find that I was kind of looking at it through another way, I was following the mice. I said, I wonder if the mice are still around. It looks like they were actually also conducting experiments later on in 2020 of the Wuhan coronavirus, so that SARS-CoV-2 virus, on the very same humanized mice that they had there at the lab. So the question is that we don't really know for sure how many of these live animals are still at the lab or were at the lab throughout 2020. But what we do know is that this was scheduled to run through 2021. We have no more information about it. We don't know if it's still going on. We don't know if it was going on at the beginning. But what we do know is that they don't want anyone talking about it.
It's a very interesting timeline. So what do you think of the lab leak hypothesis?
Well, so I think the lab leak hypothesis is likely for a variety of reasons. Number one, because we now know that they were conducting these enhancement experiments at the Wuhan Institute, and that's just it. It's not only a lab leak, right? It is an enhancement through gain of function of many of these viruses by parading them through these different species, whether it be the civets, whether it be ferrets or other mammals, or these mice, these humanized mice. So they are the ones who are creating these chimeric viruses. And we've seen in the past that they have created chimeric virus strains with the insertion of these spike proteins and then combine them with the humanized mice to see what would happen. We can see that going as far back as 2015. We can see it in 2016, 2017, even as far back as 2007 at this lab. These risky experiments were going on in the Wuhan Institute. People like Dr. Fauci knew, Francis Collins, the head of NIH, knew, Peter Daszak, who was their cutout at EcoHealth Alliance, knew about this, and all of the researchers in the Wuhan Institute. They should have told us from the very start what was going on. And, they use as a sort of endorsement and a justification for this line that, well, if we're conducting these experiments, the risk outweighs the benefit. And why does the risk outweigh the benefit? Because we will have the tools to prevent the next pandemic from happening. Well, here's the problem.
Oh, you mean the benefit outweighs the risk?
Right. Oh, right, exactly. Yeah. The benefit outweighs the risk. Because we can prevent the next pandemic. But that didn't happen. The next pandemic is what happened, and nobody prevented it. The tools weren't there. The playbook wasn't there. And in fact, it was the Wuhan Institute that was at the heart of so many. And now we're learning through intelligence, through information that we're getting out, that these outbreaks were happening. And it wasn't going on in the wet market because those early data points that we were getting, yes, some people had been to the wet market. It was a popular place to buy food, but not everybody in those early infections had any tie whatsoever to the wet market. And that is why that story fell apart. And we later learned that that was a propaganda narrative spread by the Chinese government. Why did they spread that propaganda in the first place?
So it doesn't make sense to me that the CCP would purposefully release a virus they can't control. But it does seem like they took full advantage of the situation. What do you think?
That's pretty much where my thinking is on this as well, is that once this came out, the CCP, the Politburo there, Xi Jinping and the rest, Li Keqiang, they're looking at the whole situation and saying, you know what, if we can spin this in such a way where it is not a China problem, but it becomes a world problem, then we can position the CCP, we can position China as not the bad guy, not the villain in the story. We can position ourselves as the savior. We can be the ones that save the world from the virus, regardless of what it does to the economic structures, the weakening it's going to conduct to Western Europe and the United States, the military issues that are going to happen not only throughout the West, but also throughout Asia in terms of this pandemic and this illness spreading throughout so many of China's rivals, right? They realize that they don't want to be the ones to have to bear the full cost of this thing and the full brunt of this thing. And so they say, we can use this to our advantage. And Xi Jinping, when he gave his speech at the Tiananmen Square gate, right, the same place where Chairman Mao stood and so many other leaders stood, he specifically said that China did the best to rid the world of the virus. And now, after 100 years of the CCP, he's saying that China is leading the world and not any other country.
Well, the coronavirus pandemic certainly raises a lot of questions, but one of them that comes to my mind is about what kind of scientific experiments are being done behind closed doors in an authoritarian regime that does not value transparency. Like, what else do you think could be happening behind the scenes?
Look, we've also done reporting at Human Events where not only is this a question that's being raised on podcasts and publications like our own, but also from WikiLeaks. We have a State Department cable that was written by Hillary Clinton in her office when she was Secretary of State, going back to the founding of the Wuhan Institute of Virology as a BSL, a biosafety level 4 facility. in Wuhan that was set up in partnership with the French government. So it's Hillary going to the French and saying, what are you doing to make sure that this is not part of a bioweapons program with the PLA, the Chinese military? Because we know that everything that they have set up in that laboratory is the exact same types of functions, the exact same types of capabilities that they would need to produce bioweapons. So this is not a question, by the way. And they try to say that, oh, you bring it up now, you're tinfoil, that's a crazy thing. Who would ever suggest such a thing? That couldn't possibly be what's going on. No. State Department, Hillary Clinton, their own cable says they were worried that this could be tied to a bioweapons program. We also know, of course, that the Wuhan Institute and the Chinese Academy of Science have ties to the PLA. They've got multiple military researchers, military scientists that are working hand in hand there. They're stationed there. We know that a general was sent to the Wuhan Institute of Virology pretty early on after China came clean about what was the fact that there was a pandemic whatsoever. So we can see these ties between the military and the institute as well. And so when you're asking about what type of classified programs could be going in there, I would simply have to refer you back to Hillary Clinton.
So obviously the big shocker in all of this is how much the U.S. may have been involved in the coronavirus pandemic, origin, the research, whatever you want to call it. Do you think this pandemic has taught us anything? Do you think this will change how the U.S. elites work with China?
So I have an op-ed coming out pretty soon here at humanevents.com talking about how the history of the relationship between the U.S. and the West and China has to be taken on through a new lens, because when we first started our engagement with China in the 1970s and then through the Cold War, and then started the economic relationship that really ramped up in the aftermath of Tiananmen Square, going back to 1992, when this new trade agreement was signed, there was this idea that exposure to the West and exposure to foreign direct investment would liberalize China and seek to speed up the rise of political reforms and human rights in China. What we've seen, though, has been the exact opposite. The CCP is the 1% of China. They're the elite of China. The 1% in the West, they haven't been the ones teaching the CCP about human rights and civil liberties. No. It's been the other way around. The CCP has taught our 1% authoritarianism and the power, the intoxicating power that you are given when you have total control over a population. When you can make them pliable consumers for your goods and for your products, you can become richer, you become more powerful, you can attain this God complex over the people that you rule, and then you're instituting a type of neo-feudalism rather than becoming this type of opening up and liberalization, the way that we were told in the past from Deng Xiaoping, and the way that we were told in the West. No, this has been a marriage, right? Where the CCP is influencing the 1% in the West, and they've become more authoritarian, they've become more controlling, and that is what they want. They want total ownership, total control of society. That's where it's all coming from.
Well, I'll definitely put a link to that op-ed in the description below. Jack, thanks for joining us today. It was great to hear about this story.
Really appreciate it, and thanks so much for having me on. I love all the work that you guys do at China Uncensored.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate that. And thank you for watching. We also interviewed Jack Posobiec this week on the China Unscripted Podcast. On the hour-long podcast, we covered everything from the coronavirus to how U.S. elite loved the Chinese Communist Party. It's fascinating. Be sure to check it out. Link is below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.